ask you a question. Who gets to tell you who you are? Or maybe to phrase it this way, given that there are so many voices out there trying to tell you who you are, whose voices do you listen to? Whose voices count? Whose labels do you let stick on you? It seems to me like there's this rite of passage as we're growing up. Maybe it comes somewhere between grade school and middle school and high school, where you have to go through deciding how much of what other people say about you will allow to land on you, to define you. Kids are quick to find a label and stick it on you. Oh, you're the jock, you're the one who's good at sports, you'll be the one who's first picked, or you'll be the one who's team captain. Oh, you're the cheerleader, that means you should fit this kind of mold. Oh yeah, we expect this much of you, but we don't expect you to be smart, or we don't expect you to be studious. Or sometimes it's, oh, you're the troublemaker, so we expect you to do badly in school, and you're gonna be the one who will get yourself in detention. Even the good labels we get stuck with early on in our lives have a way sometimes of confining us too, right? It's easy to get labeled the, oh, you're the smart kid, therefore you'll be the one who does this with your life. You'll go off to the best college. There's no way you'll grow up and be an artist or a novelist, or you're going to be the such and such because this is what we expected of you. It's really easy to let other people's definitions and expectations become these molds that we feel we have to fit in. When somebody else decides they've got us figured out and they tell us how to be what they expect us to be, and at least at some point in our childhood, we feel like it's so much easier to be accepted if I do what other people expect me to do, if I be what they expect me to be. And then there's Jesus. And Jesus has this way of defying everybody's expectations, not just for the sake of making trouble, but because he is so keyed into who he really is. He is so grounded in what God says about him. He knows who he is, that he doesn't have to listen to anybody else's expectations and conform to them. He can hear those other voices, but he is not obligated to fit anybody else's mold or jump through anybody else's hoops. It's what makes Jesus utterly free and free for caring for the needs of other people. Case in point, this coming Sunday, we're going to hear a story that we actually get a lot of in this year in our lectionary. It starts with the story of Jesus being baptized out in the Jordan River by John. And you might think, well, I've heard this several times. We heard about John the Baptizer way back at Christmas time in Advent, getting ready for Jesus' birth. We heard about Jesus' baptism in January. Now we're getting it again. Well, some things are worth hearing again. Some things bear repetition because the way Mark tells the story, Jesus hears at his baptism, he's coming up out of the water, and God's voice says, "You are my son, the beloved." And that's God's claim on Jesus. Jesus hears that and knows, okay, no matter what anybody else says about me, no matter what anybody else thinks of me, I know who I am because I know whose I am. I'm God's son. Jesus actually lives it. He actually believes it. And because of that, because he dares to believe what God's own voice says about him, he can face the next step. Because immediately from there, the Spirit of God drives him out into the wilderness, where there he has this confrontation with, as Mark tells it, with Satan, with the old tempter, with the old adversary, who sort of serves as like God's prosecuting attorney, that sort of figure back in the Hebrew Bible. And Mark's telling doesn't tell us the particular things that the tempter says. We don't get any actual conversations the way other gospel writers give it to us. So Mark's version is just this sort of very direct, after hearing "you're God's son," after hearing "you're the beloved," here's a confrontation with somebody who will throw other identities at you. Oh, okay, you're God's son, fine. Then how about you do things the way I suggest? I mean, everybody expects that God's son will operate this way. Everybody expects that God's son, the Messiah, will be a conquering king. Everybody expects that you'll raise up an army and overthrow that wicked empire and crown yourself king and destroy your enemies and vanquish everybody. Everybody expects that, Jesus. You can hear the tempter throwing that kind of thing out to Jesus. And again, it's a question of whether Jesus will live in the identity God has given him, or whether he feels like he has to prove it to somebody else or to himself or even to the tempter and live into somebody else's expectations of him. What happens there in the wilderness is the beginning of a whole lifelong contest for Jesus to take what God has said about him more seriously than what anybody else says about him. The whole rest of the story of the gospel, you might say, is Jesus encountering other people who want him to fit their molds. Okay, you're Jesus, so we expect you to uphold religious purity. You know, that's what a respectable Messiah would do. Or, okay, you're the Messiah. We think that you should be the one who's, you know, raising up an army and fighting off the Romans, crowning yourself king. You should be the one coming in glory and power and greatness. And at every turn, Jesus, who is so confident and grounded in what God says about him, does not care one little bit about what somebody else's expectations are. That's what frees him to be the one who hangs out at the table with all the notorious sinners and tax collectors, all the wrong people, because Jesus doesn't care about what anybody else thinks that does to his reputation. He is grounded in, I'm God's beloved. I'm God's beloved no matter where I go. So of course I'm free to go hanging out with the people you don't approve of, and I will tell them that God accepts them as well. Jesus is free to put himself in the role of servant, of the one who lays down his life for others, even if others don't think that's very respectable. He looks like a loser. He looks like he's weak if he does that. Jesus is so grounded in knowing what God says about him. I'm God's child. I'm God's beloved. None of those other voices carry any weight for him. He can say no to them because he's heard God's yes to him first. So in some ways, even though the story of Jesus being tempted in the wilderness seems so otherworldly and like, well, that's never going to matter to my faith life. I've never met the devil out in the desert. Yeah, but every day, you and I are faced with a million other voices, all trying to get us to live into their expectations. Oh, you're a religious person. Well, then you should fit this mold of what I assume religious people are like. And you won't do this, and you won't hang out with those people, and you'll look down on other people, that kind of thing. Or, you're such and such. Well, you're like this. Or, oh, I know your job. Therefore, you're like this kind of person. Or I know where you live or where your area code is. So I know what to expect about you. There are so many other voices that want to fit us into their expectations. And Jesus gives us a clear example about what it looks like to take God's claim on us so seriously that all the other things people try and lure us to living into or to being, they don't have to have staying power for us. The question is whether we will take seriously what God says about us, whether we will let God define us, God claim us, God say, you are mine, you are beloved, and hold on to that more loudly than what anybody else wants us to be, what other molds people want to fit us into. It's that clarity from Jesus knowing who he is, from those words of God as baptism, that allow him to say no to all whatever tricks, whatever conversations, whatever expectations the tempter throws at him. And then all his life long from there on out, Jesus is able to say no to people's expectations so that he can be fully free, exactly who he's meant to be, the one who shows up with all the wrong people, the one who gathers a community that includes outsiders and outcasts as well, the one who doesn't raise up an army to go kill his enemies but lays down his life in suffering love for them. That's how Jesus lives into the role of being God's beloved, God's son. That's the conversation we're going to explore this coming Sunday as we hear the story of Jesus going to be baptized, hearing that claim from God, and then facing down the tempter in the wilderness. Join us for that conversation and maybe some clarity for us about how we face the world and our lives in front of us. See you then.